Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the elf on the shelf activity? Is this a good idea? It's important to note here that there is some dark humor in this video. So even though it seems like it's about an innocent topic, an elf, it's really not that innocent. I want to note here before I go on that I am wearing an ugly Christmas shirt. I had a number of requests for an ugly Christmas shirt or sweater, and I found this one, and it kind of combines the best of both of those worlds, right? It's like a picture printed on a shirt of a very ugly Christmas sweater. So I hope I covered all of the requests with this one item. In addition to being extremely ugly, this also is fairly uncomfortable to wear. It's like wearing a garbage bag, except less fashionable. So now moving to today's topic. I'll start with the background, and then I'll move to my analysis of the elf on the shelf. So the whole idea of an elf on a shelf came from a book that was published in 2005. It's essentially a forgettable story that through a series of marketing events became quite popular. Now it would appear that a portion of society is stuck with what has become some type of tradition. Parents handle and position this stuffed elf in a way that fulfills the story in the book. The basic story goes like this. Santa Claus has these scout elves. They are sent to spy on children. They position themselves in various places in a residence. When everybody in the household goes to sleep, they use their magic to fly back to the North Pole and give Santa a briefing on both the good and bad behaviors that were witnessed. Prior to the family members waking up, the elf makes its way back to the residence and positions itself in a different location. It becomes a little game to see where the elf has popped up. Now, the magic that the elf has comes when the child names it, and that magic goes away if the child ever touches the elf. Here are my thoughts on this elf on a shelf activity. I will look at this from the point of view of the children and then the parents. So from the perspective of a child, this creepy-looking spy elf has been employed by Santa Claus to extend his mission of domination and control. The child has to take part in giving the elf the magic so that the elf can then use the magic against the child. This reminds me of the original Ghostbusters movie when the Ghostbusters were trying to keep their minds blank and not think of the instrument of their destruction. Of course, one did think of something, and that's where they got the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. The elf infiltrates the home and can pop up anywhere. Furthermore, it has immunity. The child can't even dare touch the elf, or the magic is dead. The child must live in fear because the elf is always watching. One screw up, and the elf is on the next sleigh to the North Pole, ready to snitch. From the parent's perspective, certain problems can arise here as well. The parents can forget to move the elf may get lost, a family pet could eat the elf may accidentally fall into a blender, get run over by a car, set on fire by an oven burner, or be divided in two by a circular saw. For some reason, I imagine a very dangerous environment for these elves, like they need hazardous duty pay or something. Being a spy isn't always a safe job. In addition to all the things parents have to do around Christmas time, this is just one extra thing to worry about. If the parents refuse to have a scout elf in the house, the child may lay on a guilt trip, right? Their friends have these elves in their houses. Why don't they have an elf? On the upside, the elf is a behavioral reinforcement, an affordable surveillance system to make sure the child doesn't break the rules. Kind of like a little Terminator. As a matter of fact, the elf does have a message every time it leaves. In essence, it says, "I'll be back," one of the Terminator's lines. So with all that in mind, is this a good idea, this whole elf on the shelf? Well, essentially, this elf is a little terrorist from the perspective of the child and the parents, but of course for different reasons. I understand that this is a valued tradition, and it's probably adhered to by millions of people. Therefore, I want to try to find a way for the elf to be educational, to make this a positive experience. Here's what I came up with. I was trying to think about this from the perspective of the elf. Nobody ever worries about the life of a scout elf. How did this elf get in this position in the first place? Most elves build toys. Maybe this elf did too. But from Thanksgiving to Christmas, the scout elf has a very specific job. They are field operatives sent to the corners of the globe to sit in the same place for 16 hours a day and stare. I was thinking that maybe these elves have some type of problem, like they got into trouble. Perhaps they were not employed by Santa Claus as much as sentenced by Santa Claus. This is their community service, the equivalent of wearing an orange jumpsuit and picking up trash on the side of the highway. Come to think of it, the elves are often wearing red clothes. Maybe this is their prison uniform. Then I was thinking, what types of problems would an elf get into trouble for at the North Pole? I would imagine substance use would be a real problem. They are isolated, it's cold, it's probably quite depressing. So maybe certain elves start consuming alcohol and using other drugs. I imagine there's also a lot of elf-on-elf violence as well. If the elves are criminals, and some have difficulties with violence and addiction, this could lead to a valuable learning opportunity and take care of some of the positioning concerns that parents might have with the elf. These factors could explain the behavior of the elf. A few examples. Did the elf fall over? No worries, it had too much vodka. Instead of an elf on a shelf, you have a scout with a blackout. Is the elf in the same position from one day to the next, like the parents forgot to move it? Not a problem. The elf could be depressed from contemplating its life of crime. Are the kids being too loud? Hey kids, it's time to quiet down. The elf has a hangover. Maybe the elf is moving a little bit too much, like one parent moved it and then the other one did too, because they didn't know if it had been moved from the prior day. Well, the elf could be snorting lines of cocaine. What happens if the elf gets lost temporarily? Maybe it needed to attend an AA meeting. Or, if the parent cannot find the elf at all, it was violated by his probation officer. So this would be Scout, who needs a bailout. So as we can see, the elf on the shelf can be used to teach children to have empathy for an elf suffering from a life of crime and related factors. But outside of that, it really doesn't seem to have any value. This is a limited behavioral reinforcement technique that the child will soon learn to defeat. Lasting moral behavior comes from the inside, not from external threats. Is there a way to use the elf without any downside? I would say just give the elf to the kids to play with. It's like a brief assessment. If they rip off the arms and legs, then maybe they have an anger problem, or they're delivering payback for not getting the gifts that they wanted last year. So what lessons can be learned here? Santa needs to provide funding for an elf prison at the North Pole. He needs to stop sending his problems all across the world. And an elf left in a box at a store has more value than an elf at home. So those are my thoughts on Elf on a Shelf. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thanks for watching.